The sky was gray, but not cruel. The kind of sky that held its tears until the last amen. At the edge of town, in a small red brick church with white trimmed windows, the sanctuary was filled, folding chairs down the aisle, fans waving in slow rhythm, and voices hushed by memory. They came for Miss Thelma Patterson, 83 years old, Sunday school teacher, choir mother, seamstress, story keeper, and the kind of woman who could hush a room with just a look. They came wearing their best, not out of obligation, but because Thelma believed in dignity, even in goodbye. Ruth, her niece, sat in the second pew, hands clasped around a lace handkerchief. She lived quietly, taught at the elementary school, kept to herself, but always stood by her aunt's side. Thelma raised her when Ruth's mother died, fed her grits with peach butter, taught her to sew, to read the Psalms, and to never, ever whisper the truth unless you were ready for the storm that came with it. Ruth thought she knew everything about her, until the preacher closed his Bible, until the choir stood to hum the last hymn, until Ruth reached for Thelma's old, worn Bible, the one that had sat on her nightstand for 50 years, and something slid out. It was an envelope, yellowed, edges soft from time, sealed tight. On the front, in Miss Thelma's elegant script, it read, "To be opened after I'm gone." Not a moment before, Ruth's breath caught. The room began to empty. Handshakes, hugs, whispers of casserole and grief. But Ruth sat still, staring at the envelope as if it had weight far heavier than paper. Later, at the burial, the wind picked up just enough to rustle the grass. Ruth stood at the edge of the plot as Thelma was lowered down. Dust curled in the air. The preacher said the last words. Someone cried softly behind her, and in her purse, the note pulsed like a living thing. She didn't open it, not yet. But something inside her already knew. This wasn't a goodbye. This was a beginning. That evening, the house felt too quiet. Ruth sat alone in Miss Thelma's living room, surrounded by furniture that hadn't moved in decades. The lace doilies still rested on the armchairs. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, but the air felt suspended. She held the envelope in her lap, fingers tracing her aunt's cursive like it might change its meaning. To be opened after I'm gone. She inhaled, then tore it open. Inside was a folded letter, thick with ink and memory. Ruth, if you're reading this, then I've gone to rest, and you've stayed to carry what's left. There's something I never told you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to live your life free from my shadows. But the truth, it has a way of haunting things when left buried. So here it is. Back in 1964, that land down on Riverbend Road, the one with the old pecan trees. That land was mine. It was supposed to be mine. Your grandfather, my daddy, left it to me in his will, signed and sealed. He said it was for my sewing shop, my dream, a place where black women could come and build something of their own. But after he passed, that paper disappeared, and somehow, days later, the deed ended up in the hands of Councilman Rayford Givens, same man who preached God's will on Sunday and denied colored folks loans on Monday. He claimed my father sold it to him, but my father couldn't sign a sale because he was dead by then. I spoke up once, just once, and they called me bitter, unstable, a liar. I lost my job at the school 2 weeks later. The whispers came fast, the doors even faster. So I shut my mouth. I kept going. I built a life anyway. But every time I saw that land fenced off, every time I passed by and saw his name on the post, I felt the weight of something stolen, and I promised myself, if the time ever came, that the world was willing to listen, you'd be the one to speak. Ruth let the letter fall into her lap. The pecan orchard. She remembered it, riding past it as a child in her aunt's Buick. She remembered the way Thelma always looked away when they passed it. Now she knew why. It wasn't just stolen land. It was a stolen voice, a stolen dream, a stolen place. And it had a name carved into the theft. Rayford Givens, still living, still smiling, still giving speeches at banquets about family values and honest labor. Ruth sat back, the wind rattling faintly outside. The letter had done what it came to do. Now the question was hers to answer. Will you speak, or will you let the silence win again? The next morning, Ruth didn't go to work. She didn't answer calls about the repast leftovers or the church bulletin. She put on her walking shoes, slipped the letter into her coat pocket, and started asking questions. Not loudly, not in anger, just enough to wake the dust. Her first stop was Sister Marian, one of Thelma's oldest friends and the town's unofficial historian. She found her tending roses in the front yard, wide straw hat casting shadows over a sharp-eyed face. Sister Marian, Ruth began softly, did you know about the land on Riverbend Road, that it was supposed to be Aunt Thelma's? The old woman didn't blink. She clipped a rose. We all knew. Ruth paused. And no one said anything? Child, she said, turning to face her, you could get run out of town for less back then. People vanished over land, or ended up accidentally in jail. She took a breath and looked away. Your aunt was brave once, spoke up at a council meeting, said Rayford forged the deed. You should have seen his face. What happened? He laughed. Then she lost her job. 2 weeks later. Ruth continued asking. At the diner, at the barber shop, at the feed store, everywhere she heard the same thing. We knew. Couldn't prove it. Didn't want no trouble. A few looked ashamed. Most just looked tired. It was as if the entire town had quietly watched a theft in slow motion and decided that survival was safer than justice. Back home, Ruth laid Thelma's letter on the kitchen table. It looked different now, heavier, like it didn't just carry words, it carried generations of swallowed stories. She flipped it over and wrote something on the back. She was silenced. I won't be. Later that night, she sat down with Vanessa, a young reporter for the county paper. Vanessa read the letter in full, eyes widening, then hardening. Ruth, this is big. If we publish this, I know. He still has power, still sits on the housing board, still speaks at the university. Are you ready for what comes with this? Ruth didn't answer right away. She looked out the window where the moon hung over the old pecan trees in the distance. He had 40 years to speak lies without question. I figure we're overdue for one truth. The next Sunday, Ruth walked into the very church where Thelma had sung in the choir for 50 years. She carried the letter in her hand, and when the preacher finished his sermon, Ruth stood up from the second pew, the whole room turning to face her. She cleared her throat. Before we leave here today, I need to read something my aunt left behind. The sanctuary fell into an uneasy stillness. Fans slowed, coughs ceased. Even the preacher sat back, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment unfold. Ruth stood tall, Thelma's letter trembling slightly in her hand, not from fear, but from the weight it carried. She cleared her throat again and read, line by line, voice steady. Back in 1964, that land down on Riverbend Road, it was supposed to be mine. Gasps rippled through the room. The old heads bowed. The young ones blinked confused. And near the back, Councilman Rayford Givens, dressed in a crisp gray suit, froze mid-blink. Ruth didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She kept reading. As she reached the part about the forged deed, the lost job, the whisper campaign, a visible shift happened in the room. Some turned their heads toward Givens. Others stared at the floor, and a few sat up straighter, like something deep in them was finally being named. When she finished, Ruth folded the letter and said, "Miss Thelma Patterson was a woman of dignity. She didn't ask for pity. She never needed attention. But she deserved truth, and I won't let her memory be buried beneath anyone's lies." She stepped back into her pew. Her hands were still, her heart calm. The preacher stood slowly, struggling for words. "Well now, Sister Ruth, that was unexpected, but necessary." He turned to the congregation. "Perhaps we all need to reflect on what we've allowed to grow in the shadows." Councilman Givens left without shaking hands that day. His face was tight, his stride quick, but his name was no longer untouchable, not after Ruth's voice cracked the glass. By Monday morning, the paper published the full letter. The story made its way to local radio. A petition circulated to remove Givens from the board. And quietly, families began coming forward with their own buried stories of deeds missing, loans denied, land transferred for pennies. Ruth sat on her porch that evening, tea in hand, letter folded beside her. She wasn't sure what would come next. Maybe backlash, maybe more silence, but maybe something would finally grow. Spring came slow, like it was waiting for permission. The storms passed, the air warmed, and down on Riverbend Road, a small crowd gathered on a patch of land once lost to greed, now reclaimed through truth. The fence was gone. The gate now swung wide, painted white with vines curling upward, and just beyond it, young hands and old hands dug into the soil, planting, watering, building. Ruth stood near the pecan trees, now budding again after years of neglect. She wore one of Thelma's old sun hats and watched as children pushed wheelbarrows full of mulch while elders dropped seeds into the dirt. Collard greens, okra, tomatoes, pride. They called it Thelma's Garden. Not a protest, not a monument, but a living thing. The kind of legacy you can touch, taste, and tend. A wooden sign near the front read, "In honor of Thelma Patterson, whose voice planted the seed. This land was once stolen. Now it grows justice." Councilman Givens had resigned quietly 3 weeks earlier. No press, no apology, just vanished behind a locked office door. No one celebrated his fall. They just moved forward, because this was never about revenge. It was about restoration. Ruth wiped her hands on her jeans and helped a young girl tie up a row of bean vines. "Miss Ruth, was this really your aunt's land?" the girl asked. Ruth smiled. "It was always hers, even when they said it wasn't." The girl nodded, then ran off to plant sunflowers with the others. Ruth sat on a bench near the trees, eyes soft, heart full. She pulled Thelma's letter from her pocket, edges worn now from being read and reread, and folded it one last time. "You got your garden, Auntie," she whispered, "and they can't take it back." Some truths bloom in secret. Others bloom when the silence breaks. But the strongest ones, they bloom in the open, where everyone can see them grow. They tried to bury the truth, with silence, with shame, and with stolen deeds. But Miss Thelma left behind more than a note. She left a seed, a truth carried in paper, planted in soil, and watered by a voice that refused to stay quiet. If this story touched you, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe, so more stories like this can take root and bloom where no one thought they could.